Rosemary DiCarlo is the first woman to hold the position of UN Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Her Security Council briefings are often reality checks on political hotspots and conflicts. I sat down with her for the latest on Ukraine, Sudan, and the Black Sea Grain Initiative. I'm Frank Uciardo, and this is TRT World One-on-One. Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Peacebuilding and Political Affairs, thank you for joining us here on TRT World.
Happy to be here.
Now, I understand you are the first woman to be in this position in the history of the UN. What's that like?
Well, it's a challenging position. I think for a woman or for a man, it was a good thing for me to take on this position. I'm thrilled to be in it. I have to say it brought tremendous responsibility, not just for the issues that I cover, but not to let my female colleagues down.
Well, prior to this position, of course, we all knew you as the acting U.S. ambassador to the UN at one time, and you were, I guess, really, if I remember correctly, in various parts of Europe, in various postings, and have quite an expertise on what is going on in there, and even received medals from the presidents of Kosovo and Albania. Is that true?
That's true. That is true from my Balkan days.
Well, when you look at that, and you look at what's going on in the region now, of course, this brings us to Ukraine. And in the briefing to the Security Council, you strongly condemned the recent airstrikes in Ukraine by Russia, and you were very critical of the airstrikes on infrastructure and civilian targets. Tell us more about that.
Well, look, I think we've been very clear from the beginning. The Secretary General's been clear, the General Assembly's been clear that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of the UN Charter. It's a violation of international law. We follow very closely the events in Ukraine. We have our colleagues who are on the ground who are monitoring human rights and various other activities and actions, and we are appalled, frankly, by what we see in terms of the devastation, not only of civilian infrastructure, but the deaths and the harm that has been brought to civilians in this conflict.
Would it be a fair statement to say that most of the countries represented here at the United Nations are appalled and disagree with Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Well, I think the voting in the GA was fairly telling in that it was 140, 141, depending on the resolutions, who were very clear in their statement that this is a violation of the UN Charter.
And I think President Zelensky also said it's not about 140 nations, is it?
It's not about...
Not about 140 nations. I think that's what Zelensky said in his speech.
That's right. That's right. No, I think this is, it's very sad to see. I mean, certainly that you have two countries with a lot in common history, and the fighting that continues, the suffering of civilians. We are doing a number of assessments of what kind of reconstruction is going to be needed, for example, in the energy sector, and there's tremendous devastation already on the ground.
One of the things that President Zelensky touched upon was the weaponization of energy. Tell us more about that.
The weaponization
of energy.
Well, I think this is a concern in that what we see happening now is that energy facilities are being attacked. Tremendous hardship on the people. Food security and food insecurity. I mean, we're very concerned about not only the well-being of Ukrainians on the ground to have the kind of supplies that they need and resources they need, but look at the situation with the exports of grain, which have not come to a standstill, in that some is still getting out through the solidarity corridors, but not through the Black Sea.
Well, is it your impression that Russia had been signaling for months before they pulled out of the deal that they weren't happy with it?
They definitely were clear about not being happy because they felt that there were restrictions, some of them unintended consequences, if you will, of sanctions that were hampering their ability to export fertilizer, which of course is desperately needed. And the Secretary General worked very hard with the European Union, with the United States, and trying to ensure that various restrictions that existed did not impact, for example, the export of fertilizer. That said, companies make decisions on their own. They don't make decisions by whether something's legal, not legal, whatever. And their fertilizer export did decrease somewhat, but we need to get it all back on track. I mean, the rest of the world is hurting as well.
But it seems to me that the Russians were putting up excuses like the access to the SWIFT banking system, which I understand the U.S. was ready to compromise on.
There were some discussions about finding a carve-out, if you will, to be able to do this, or a subsidiary that could help with it. There certainly is a need, as I said, for not only food to be exported from both Russia and Ukraine, but also fertilizer.
So the impact really has been across many borders in many countries throughout the world.
Exactly, exactly.
Now, for years, the UN has fostered women's rights in Afghanistan. They helped them really build up their access to jobs, to education. And then when the Taliban seized power, a lot of that was eroded. Tell us about that.
Well, it's severely eroded. Girls are not able to attend school beyond the 6th grade. There's no university for them. There are many restrictions about their freedom of movement, certainly their dress, their travel, their ability to work. It is hard to imagine, frankly, how the Taliban can, on the one hand, want to improve the economy of Afghanistan and really want to move it forward, but yet is denying half the population from the education that would be needed in order really to propel development in the country. It's also a concern in that health workers, for example, I mean, female nurses, female doctors help female patients. If they're not educated, what's the next generation going to do? Since culturally it's not acceptable for a male to be treating a female.
It also appears to me that traditionally there's a lot of jobs that women do better than men, particularly in the field of healthcare.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now they are allowing some women to work in this field, continuing to do so. We work with them. Some of our specialized agencies are working with them. It's extremely important that this be maintained. But it's important that women are allowed to be in all fields and allowed to have an education, a proper education.
How is the UN's access there in Afghanistan right now, aid-wise?
Well, in terms of our political access, I mean, we are in Kabul and we have actually very good relations with many of the ministries and see them, discuss with them on a whole range of issues. In the delivery of assistance is going forward, but there are complications. There are complications in terms of access sometimes, and it's heartbreaking because Afghanistan is a very poor country. Economically, it's getting worse, and the aid is needed.
So often when we talk in terms of what the UN does in the world, a lot of what they do is hampered by access in a lot of countries. Even though they have the wherewithal and the supplies and the money and the aid, they can't get to the people in need.
That's correct. Sometimes it's because there's conflict and there's an inability to get there. Sometimes it's just a political, decision that, that certain areas of the country are off limits. It depends, but certainly our humanitarian colleagues are doing incredible work around the world with limited resources, I must say.
I want to get to your opening remarks at UNGA 78 this year in the high-level ministerial meeting that dealt with Sudan, which is clearly one of the biggest hotspots that the UN has had to deal with. And what do you believe the humanitarian response would look like?
Well, I mean, first of all, we need greater access. And part of it is, it's not that there's a political decision not to provide access to us. It is because of the fighting. There's an inability to get to certain places. That said, our colleagues are getting around, both international and national colleagues on the ground. We need a lot more funding. There is no question about that. We need a lot more funding, not just in Sudan, but elsewhere. And we need more funding to deal with the refugees. We've got quite a number of Sudanese who are now in Chad, in Egypt, and they need to be helped.
Did anybody in the UN administration foresee that there was going to be these coups coming down the road in the way they have?
I don't think we anticipated it. I will be very frank. We didn't anticipate the fighting in Sudan. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. We were working very hard to bring parties together on a transition, to a real democratic structure. We managed to get civil society together, the various groups that had been involved in 2018 with the sort of revolution. The military was the one we had to bring in, and then it erupted. In terms of the coups in the Sahel, the most recent one also in Gabon, I don't think we anticipated it. We understand the difficulties in the Sahel. There's no question. They're dealing with terrorism. They're dealing with lack of development, climate change that has a huge impact on the population. But we did not anticipate what would happen, particularly this last one in Niger.
When you started your career, you represented the interests of the U.S. government. Here you have a job where you represent the interests of all these countries. How different has it been for you?
Well, it's different perhaps in a sense that, the U.S. government you have a set policy, as a Foreign Service officer, as a diplomat, what you do. Here, I must say that we are constantly, every day, assessing what our policy is, what our strategy should be, etc. It's overwhelming in some days, given the number of crises in the world and the lack of resources to deal with them. But it is really, I think, very, very rewarding to be able to try, to be able to help people if you can, and to try to continue to help people in countries that are fragile, countries that are at war, and countries that deserve far better than what they are dealing with today.
In closing, from a personal perspective, when you get up in the morning and you see this world in trouble and turmoil, where do you find resilience?
Well, I think what keeps us going is that every little thing we do that we feel we've made things a little bit better keeps us going. That's one. It's not expecting a huge change overnight or even in over a month or a year, but every bit of progress brings a smile to my face, let's put it that way. The other thing I have to say, and this is something that is not well understood, when you do political work, sometimes it's not about the big solution, it's about preventing something worse from happening, and we do that every day.
Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs and Peacebuilding, thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World.
Thank you.